You are my daddy." The childish voice tore through the elegant silence of the boardroom like a stone dropped into a glass lake. For a second, no one understood what had happened. The executives around the enormous marble table stopped talking. Fingers typing on laptops hung suspended in the air. The screens displaying financial charts remained lit, numbers blinking indifferently, and the most powerful man on Victoria Island stood completely still because a small girl had just run across the room and was hugging his legs. The man's name was Chief Obinna Okoro. To the business world, he was known as the Iceman, a ruthless millionaire who had built one of Nigeria's largest real estate empires. Anyone who read the business pages knew. Okoro Holdings had commercial towers in Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt, residential developments from Ikoyi to Lekki, and a reputation for clinical precision in negotiations that made competitors retreat even before sitting at the table. Newspapers said he had nerves of steel. Investors said he never lost control. His employees knew that a single glance from him could freeze an entire room. There was a silent joke in the corridors of Okoro Tower, the group's headquarters on Victoria Island, that the thermometer dropped 2 degrees whenever Chief Obinna entered the elevator. It wasn't a joke of affection. It was an observation from those who had learned over time that smiling near the boss was an unnecessary risk. But at that moment, Chief Obinna Okoro didn't know what to do. The girl hugged him with all the strength of her small arms. Her dress was simple, washed so many times that the color had faded at the edges. Her small shoes were worn on the soles, with the leather peeling at the tip of her right foot. Her dark hair was tied in 2 crooked pigtails, probably done in a hurry that morning, with one of the ribbons almost loose. She seemed completely out of place in that room, full of men in bespoke suits, with the imported marble table and leather chairs that cost more than many people earned in 3 months. "You are my daddy," she repeated. A murmur ran through the boardroom. One of the directors dropped his pen. The metallic sound echoed through the room like a discordant note in a symphony. Another executive leaned forward in disbelief, because everyone there knew something about Chief Obinna Okoro. He never had children, not even during his marriage. A marriage that ended 5 years earlier, when his wife died in an accident on the Lagos-Ibadan expressway on a drizzly afternoon. The kind of accident that doesn't make headlines but destroys everything inside. Since then, Chief Obinna had shut himself off in work. He didn't attend social events, didn't participate in parties, didn't allow anyone to get too close. The mansion where he lived, in Ikoyi, was famous for its silence. Employees said the corridors looked like a museum, a place where joy had been forbidden by decree, where every painting, every vase, every object was in its right place and stayed there motionless, fulfilling a decorative function that warmed nothing until now, because the girl continued to hug his legs. "Daddy!" Chief Obinna finally reacted, slowly lowering his gaze, and for the first time in many years, his eyes showed something different. Confusion. "Girl," he said in a deep voice, choosing his words with the same care he used to draft a contractual clause. "I think you are mistaken." But the little one shook her head. She didn't seem scared, didn't seem nervous, didn't seem like a child who had accidentally entered the wrong place. She just seemed certain, with that absolute certainty that only very young children still manage to have before the world begins to teach them to doubt everything. "I'm not mistaken." The executives began to look towards the door, and then the palest woman in the entire company appeared, the new cleaner. Her name was Ngozi Okafor. She had only started working at the mansion 2 weeks ago. She was a woman with a beautiful but tired face, with dark circles under her eyes that told a story of sleepless nights, of bills calculated by dim light, of decisions made alone, with no one to share the burden. Her hands had that specific roughness of someone who works with water and cleaning products every day. When she saw her daughter in the middle of the most important boardroom in Okoro Tower, her heart almost stopped. "Ah!" she exclaimed with a trembling voice. The girl turned her head. "Mummy, look, I found my daddy." The silence that followed was even more uncomfortable than the previous one. Ngozi ran to her daughter and gently took her arm, trying not to appear too desperate, trying to maintain what little composure she had left. "I am so sorry, Chief Okoro," she said, her voice breaking. She doesn't know what she's saying. She tried to pull her away. But Chioma wouldn't let go of the millionaire's suit. "But Mummy, he looks like the daddy I drew." The phrase was so innocent that no one knew how to react. It was the kind of thing a child says without knowing it's shattering the air around them. One of the executives coughed uncomfortably. Another mumbled something about security, about how that kind of access control failure was unacceptable, in a building of Okoro Tower's standard. But Chief Obina raised a hand, a unique gesture, his open palm facing the room, and everyone obeyed without thinking. 20 years of authority distilled into a single gesture. His gaze remained fixed on the girl. "Why do you say I am your father?" Chioma looked at him with the naturalness of a child talking about something obvious, like the sky being blue or rain being wet. "Because when I saw you, I felt like I already knew you." The room fell completely silent, because those words were not an accusation, not a calculated lie, not the trick of someone trying to take advantage of a situation. They were simply the truth from the heart of a 6-year-old girl, raw, unfiltered, without malice, impossible to refute with logic. Ngozi was on the verge of tears. "Sir, please forgive me. She doesn't have a father. She never knew him. Sometimes, she imagines things. I know it was an absurd situation. I understand. If you want to fire me right now." But before she could finish the sentence, Chioma lifted her head and said something no one expected. "I'm not imagining." She looked directly at Chief Obina. "Fathers are not always the ones we are born with." She paused briefly. That pause carried weight. Sometimes they are the ones who appear when we need them most. And at that instant, for the first time in 5 years, something within Chief Obina Okoro's frozen heart moved. It wasn't love yet, no, but it was something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Curiosity. During the seconds that followed the girl's words, no one in the boardroom moved. The executives remained seated around the enormous marble table, but the meeting had completely gone off track. The presentations on the monitors continued to run on their own. Growth charts, market projections, comparative tables that at that moment held no importance. No one was paying attention to any of it. Everyone was looking at Chief Obina Okoro, the man who never allowed interruptions, the man whose schedule had every 15 minutes precisely timed, the man who could fire someone just for speaking out of turn. And yet, there he was, with a small girl hugging his suit, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ngozi Okafor was on the verge of panic. "Chief Okoro, please forgive me," she said with a trembling voice, trying to control her breathing. "She doesn't understand where she is. I don't know how she managed to get in here. I swear, I didn't know. I was on the 3rd floor when she tried to separate her daughter." Chioma hugged the millionaire's leg again. "Mummy, wait." Chief Obina lowered his gaze again. There was something strange about the situation that he couldn't name. The girl didn't seem to be acting on a whim. She wasn't a spoiled child making a scene for attention. There was no shame in her eyes, no fear. There was only a childish certainty that unnerved him in a way no business adversary had managed in 20 years of his career. "How did you get in here?" he finally asked. Chioma replied with complete naturalness, as if the answer were obvious. The door was open. One of the executives murmured, "Security should check that urgently." But Chief Obina raised his hand. The room immediately fell silent again. Ngozi no longer knew what to do with her hands. "Sir, I promise on everything sacred that this will not happen again. If you give me another chance, I guarantee that." But Chief Obina wasn't looking at her. He continued to observe the girl with an attention that seemed of another order, not the attention of someone evaluating a problem to solve, but of someone who found something they didn't expect to find. "What did you say your name was?" "Chioma." "And how old are you?" The girl proudly held up 6 fingers. 6. One of the directors discreetly leaned towards his colleague and murmured, "This is ridiculous." But no one dared to say it out loud, because something was happening before them, something none of them expected to see in their entire professional lives. Chief Obina Okoro was genuinely talking to the girl. "Chioma," he finally said, his voice softer than anyone in that room had ever heard from him. "I am not your father." The girl tilted her head to the side. She thought for a few seconds with that concentrated seriousness children have when they are truly pondering something important. And then she replied with a logic so simple and absolute that it left everyone speechless. "That's what you think." 2 executives let out a nervous, almost involuntary laugh, and then immediately regretted it. But Chief Obina didn't laugh. His eyes remained fixed on the girl, with an expression no one there knew how to interpret. "Why do you think so?" Chioma looked around the room at the men in suits, at the imposing chairs, at the screens with graphs. She certainly didn't understand. "Because everyone here is afraid of you?" The comment was so direct that several men visibly shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Some looked away, others suddenly studied their own ID badges with inexplicable interest. The girl looked back at the millionaire. "But I'm not." Chief Obina felt something strange in his chest, a small but real thing. For years, people around him had treated him with respect or with fear. Employees who calculated every word before speaking, directors with fake smiles when he entered the room, investors who agreed with everything, even when they disagreed internally. But no one in years had spoken to him that way, with total honesty, without calculating the risk, without wanting anything in return. "And why aren't you afraid of me?" Chioma smiled, and her smile was of a simplicity that cut through. "Because a daddy doesn't scare." The silence that followed was deep and long, the kind of silence that is not empty, but full. Ngozi was completely embarrassed, her face red, wishing the marble floor would open up and swallow her along with her daughter. "Chief Okoro, please." But Chief Obina raised his hand again, then turned to the executives with a definitive expression. "The meeting is adjourned." The words surprised everyone. "But, Chief Okoro, tomorrow's contract needs approval before." Chief Obina's tone allowed no discussion. It was the tone that ended conversations, dissolved objections, made the subject non-existent. The men slowly began to rise, gathering their papers and laptops with careful movements, as if making noise could be dangerous. As they filed out awkwardly, they couldn't help but look one more time at the girl who had interrupted the most important meeting of the month. When the door closed, only 3 people remained: Chief Obina, Ngozi, and Chioma. The silence between them was of a different quality, more intimate, more vulnerable. Ngozi lowered her head. "Sir, I know this was a grave lapse. If you wish to dismiss me, I completely understand. I will bear no grudge. I only ask that you give me a reference, because I have my daughter to raise. And where does her father live?" Chief Obina's question was direct, addressed to Chioma. The girl replied with a naturalness that disarmed any strategy. "I don't have one, Daddy." Ngozi closed her eyes for a moment. It was a conversation she had tried to avoid for years, with school teachers, with curious neighbors, with her own daughter, on nights when Chioma asked why her friend had a father, and she didn't. Her father left when she was very small, she explained in a low voice, looking away. "Since then, it's just been the 2 of us. I do what I can." Chioma looked back at Chief Obina. "That's why, when I saw you, I thought it could be you." Chief Obina felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't exactly sadness. It was something deeper, a feeling he had carefully buried along with the memories of his wife, along with the plans they had made and could never realize. He was 42, with a fortune he couldn't spend, a house too big, and a capacity to feel that he had put in a box and stored in a place he thought he would never need to open again. Ngozi took her daughter's hand. "Come on, Chioma, we've bothered him enough." The girl walked a few steps towards the door, but stopped. She turned once more to the millionaire. "You know something, Chief Obina?" He looked up, not correcting the informal address that under any other circumstances would be unthinkable. "What?" The girl smiled. "Even if you're not my daddy, I think you need one." Chief Obina stood completely still, because no one, in years, ever, under any circumstances, had dared to say such a thing to him. And as the girl left the boardroom hand in hand with her mother, her little footsteps echoing down the marble corridor, for the first time in a long time, the corridors of Okoro Tower no longer seemed completely empty. When the boardroom door closed behind Ngozi and Chioma, silence returned to the building, but it was no longer the same silence. For years, that place had been governed by a perfect order. Employees walked carefully through the corridors, knowing that making unnecessary noise was a way to attract unwanted attention. Assistants spoke in low voices. Meetings started promptly and ended when the boss decided they had ended. It was a silence of discipline, the kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from fear. Now it was a silence of a different nature, a silence filled with a question no one had the courage to voice aloud. Chief Obina remained standing by the marble table, his eyes fixed on the door through which the girl had left. The phrase kept repeating in his mind, like a song that sticks without permission. "I think you need a daddy." No one had spoken to him like that in years, not the executives who spent all day around him, not the employees who greeted him every morning with that professional smile of someone being paid to smile, not even the few he still called friends, if he could even still call friends the people who surrounded him, who called occasionally for lunch and talked business, pretending they were talking about friendship. Finally, Chief Obina walked to the office window. From there, he could see all of Lagos that he had helped build, commercial towers that existed because he had signed the contracts, residential developments that bore the Okoro name on construction signs and deeds, business centers in Marina, estates in Gabagada, projects coming out of the ground in Yaba and Victoria Island. It was a city partially his, and it was completely empty, because as he observed that landscape representing 20 years of work, Chief Obina remembered something he had long avoided, the silence of his own home. The mansion in Ikoyi was enormous. It had 12 bedrooms, of which he used one. Halls full of furniture chosen by a decorator he never saw again after the delivery. Gardens perfectly trimmed by staff who arrived at 6 a.m. and left before lunch. A heated swimming pool that hadn't been used since before his wife's death. All the staff treated that house as an obligation. They arrived, did their work, left. No one left a trace, no one left a sound, no one left anything to indicate that a human being had passed through there. After his wife's death, Chief Obina had stopped living. He had simply continued working. His assistant's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Chief Okoro. He turned slowly, like someone who had just returned from a long internal journey. Yes? Mrs. Okafor is waiting in the corridor. Chief Obina frowned slightly. Why? She says she wants to apologize again, that she needs you to know she didn't arrange anything, that Chioma left without her knowing. For a moment, he thought of saying no, but something inside stopped him. The same thing that had prevented him from sending the girl away immediately when she ran into the room. Send her in. The assistant hesitated for a second, because that was unusual. Receiving the cleaner in the executive office was not in any protocol, but Chief Obina's expression left no room for questioning. Yes, sir. A minute later, Ngozi Okafor entered the office with nervous steps, like someone crossing a minefield, trying to tread only on safe stones. Chioma was by her side, holding her hand. The girl looked at everything with immense curiosity. The millionaire's office was indeed another world. A solid wood desk the size of a car, elegant paintings on the walls, aerial photographs of Lagos in black and white framed in brushed metal, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a living panorama that changed every hour of the day. There was a bookshelf that occupied the entire wall, filled with books from the floor almost to the ceiling. Books on business, architecture, history, philosophy. Some looked new, others had clearly been read many times, with bent spines and forgotten bookmarks between the pages. Chief Okoro, Ngozi said quickly, with that voice of someone who had rehearsed the words in the corridor and still wasn't confident in them. I am truly sorry for what happened. I don't know how Chioma managed. Chief Obina didn't answer immediately. He observed the girl. Chioma had let go of her mother's hand and was walking slowly along the bookshelf, reading the titles with that serious concentration of a child still learning to decipher letters. All these books are yours? They are. Did you read all of them? Chief Obina hesitated. Not all. The girl smiled, a smile of someone who had just discovered that the most intimidating adult in the world also has a weakness. My mummy says books are like friends. The more you have, the less lonely you are. Ngozi looked at her nervously. Chioma, please, you don't have to. But Chief Obina raised his hand. Let her speak. Ngozi closed her mouth. Chief Obina looked back at the girl with different attention, as if he were hearing something he hadn't heard in a long time. Do you like books? Chioma nodded with immense enthusiasm, her head bobbing up and down several times. Very much, but we don't have many at home because books are expensive. She said this with the same naturalness with which she said everything, without wanting to cause embarrassment, without asking for anything. It was just a fact, like the sun being hot or the rain being wet. Ngozi felt her stomach clench, but Chief Obina didn't seem bothered. He looked at the girl for a moment, then followed her gaze to the bookshelf. Then Chioma walked to the window and stopped completely. Wow. Her eyes were wide, her forehead almost touching the cold glass. From here, it looks like you are the king of Lagos. Chief Obina couldn't help a small reaction. It wasn't exactly a smile, but it was the closest to a smile he had come in years. A slight relaxation in the line of his lips, a small thing that changed the entire architecture of his face. Ngozi noticed it, and that surprised her more than anything else, because everyone in the company knew. Chief Obina Okoro did not smile. It was a fact as established as the company's address or its registration number. You know what, Chief Obina? He raised an eyebrow. What? The girl turned to him with total naturalness. Your office is very beautiful. She looked around, examining every detail with the eyes of someone making a careful inventory. The paintings, the desk, the books, the plants in the corner, the light coming through the immense windows. Then she added with absolute sincerity and without any cruelty, but it's very sad. The comment left Ngozi completely paralyzed. Chioma, but Chief Obina didn't seem irritated. He seemed thoughtful, in the same way he becomes thoughtful when someone presents a fact that contradicts a premise he had assumed to be correct. Why do you say that? The girl replied without hesitation. Because no one laughs here. Silence filled the office again, but this time it was different, because Chief Obina Okoro was beginning to understand something he hadn't wanted to see for years. something he had hidden beneath spreadsheets and meetings and contracts and targets and quarter-by-quarter results. It wasn't the office that was sad, it was him, and for the first time since his wife's death, someone had had the courage to say it. Not a therapist, not a childhood friend, not someone who had known him for decades. A 6-year-old girl who had entered through the wrong door on an important meeting day and had spoken the simplest truth in the world. Chief Obinna looked at Chioma for a few seconds. Then he said something that surprised even Ngozi. "Would you like to come back tomorrow?" The girl's eyes widened with immense enthusiasm. "Here in your office?" Chief Obinna nodded slowly. "Yes." Chioma smiled, and that smile lit up the office more than all the ceiling lights combined. Because without knowing it, a 6-year-old girl had just begun to change the life of the coldest man in the city. The next day, something strange happened in Chief Obinna Okoro's perfectly organized routine. For years, his mornings had been exactly the same. Black coffee, without sugar, 2 cups, absolute silence. The day's financial newspaper opened on the kitchen table, but rarely truly read, more as a ritual than a necessity. A way to fill the time between waking up and having to face the day. The car waiting at the mansion entrance at 7:30 sharp. Elder James, the old butler who had worked for the Okoro family for 23 years, already knew every detail of that routine by heart. His grey suit on Mondays and Wednesdays, the navy blue on Tuesdays and Thursdays, black reserved for Fridays when there were more formal meetings with external partners. He knew that Chief Obinna drank his coffee standing, leaning against the kitchen counter, looking out the window at the garden. He knew that he didn't like conversation in the morning. He knew that silence was not rudeness, it was a necessity. In 23 years, Elder James had learned to read his employer without him needing to speak. He knew when he was in a hurry, he knew when he was worried, he knew when the day's agenda was too heavy to fit into the scheduled time, and he knew that morning that something was different. Chief Obinna had been standing in the kitchen for too long. He wasn't reading the newspaper, he wasn't checking his phone, he was simply looking out the window at the garden, at the trees, at the small pond, at the wooden bench by the water, with that expression of someone remembering something he had kept far away. Elder James waited in the corridor with the discretion his position required. Finally, Chief Obinna placed the cup on the counter. "James, sir, today we will have a visitor." The butler inclined his head slightly. "At what time should I prepare?" "Mrs. Okafor's daughter." A pause. Elder James was a man of few facial expressions, which had been honed by time and his position. But at that moment, something crossed his face that wasn't exactly surprise. It was a contained satisfaction. The kind one keeps to avoid appearing impertinent. "Understood, sir. I will prepare the garden." Chief Obinna looked at him. "Also prepare a snack. Children like those things." Elder James smiled slowly, discreetly, the way he allowed himself on rare occasions. "Yes, sir, with pleasure." An hour later, Ngozi Okafor stood before the mansion's main entrance, her heart beating faster than she could control. The house, seen up close, was even more imposing than it appeared from the iron gate. 2 floors of light stone with dark wood details, an impeccable garden at the entrance, with a row of royal palm trees marking the path to the door like a vegetative guard of honor. Stone fountains murmured a constant song and a general quietness that had something of a museum about it, exactly as the employees described. "Chioma," she said softly, holding her daughter's hand a little tighter than necessary. "We need to behave very well, okay? Don't touch anything without asking. Don't run inside the house. Don't ask questions about things that are not our business." "I understand, Mummy. And don't call him Daddy or King or any other name you invent on the spot." Chioma considered this for a moment. "What if he asks me what I want to call him?" Ngozi briefly closed her eyes. "Chief Obinna or Mr. Okoro," but politely. The girl nodded, but with that expression of someone agreeing to end the conversation, rather than out of deep conviction. The door opened before Ngozi could ring the bell. Elder James appeared in his impeccable suit, and that air of serene dignity that only develops after decades of serving with care and genuine respect. "Good morning, Mrs. Okafor." Ngozi lowered her head. "Good morning, Elder James." The butler looked at the girl, and the corner of his eyes crinkled slightly, the way it happens when someone truly smiles but is trying to be professional. "And you must be." The girl smiled with all the force she had. "Chioma, Chief Okoro is in the back garden. You may follow me." They walked through the main corridor, white marble, indirect lighting, framed photographs on the walls documenting decades of Okoro Holdings' history, inaugurated projects, acquired land, buildings under construction that today were skyscrapers with the Okoro name engraved on the facade. Chioma looked at everything. When they reached the back garden, the girl stopped completely. The space was enormous, a lawn area large enough for a football match. Smaller fountains distributed at strategic points, trees of different species, a flamboyant tree in the corner, a mango tree at the back, a tall, solitary palm tree near the wall, creating generous shaded niches, a small artificial pond with gold and red tilapia fish swimming among broad-leafed aquatic plants, and further back, almost hidden by a purple flowering creeper that had grown uncontrolled, an old wooden swing with slightly rusted chains, the wooden seat stained by time and rain. It seemed someone had used it a long time ago, and then no one had touched it since. Chioma went straight to the swing, touching the wood with her index finger, with the caution of someone testing something that might break. "This swing is yours?" Chief Obina, sitting on the bench by the pond, looked at the object as if seeing it for the first time in a long while. It was my. A pause. The garden grew quieter. Even the tilapia fish seemed to stop swimming for a moment. It was my wife's. She liked to sit here in the afternoons. She said you could hear the birds better from here than anywhere else in the house. Chioma turned to him with that concentrated seriousness she reserved for important things. "Where is she?" Ngozi closed her eyes. "Chioma, she died," Chief Obina said. There was no bitterness in his voice. There was something harder to describe, an acceptance that had taken years to learn, and that still hurts sometimes, like an old fracture that aches when it's about to rain. Chioma was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry." Chief Obina looked at her. "Thank you." The girl returned to examining the swing. "The chains are rusted." "They are. It needed fixing." "It did." Chioma looked at him firmly, with the same seriousness of an engineer evaluating a compromised structure. "Then fix it." Ngozi placed her hand on her forehead with the delicacy of someone trying to ward off a headache that was already coming. "My daughter." But Chief Obina looked at the swing for a long moment. He looked at the creeper that had grown over it, at the chains he had allowed to rust, at the seat he had allowed to be ruined by rain and sun and 5 years of neglect. Then he turned to Elder James, who was observing everything from the veranda with absolute discretion. "James, call Sagan first thing tomorrow morning. Ask him to take care of the swing. New chains, treated wood, whatever it needs." The butler nodded with a lightness that wasn't professional. It was genuine. "Immediately, sir." Chioma smiled and walked back to the bench by the pond, sitting next to Chief Obina, with the naturalness of someone who does this every day, as if that bench had been made exactly for 2 people of that size. "Do you live here alone?" "I do." The girl frowned with that specific frown when something doesn't make sense to her. "That's very sad." Ngozi covered her face with both hands. "My daughter, for goodness sake, why do you say that?" Chief Obina asked. "Because big houses should have many children. That way the house doesn't look like a museum." Chief Obina looked at her. "You think it looks like a museum?" "It does." Chioma swung her small feet on the bench with the ease of someone completely at home. "A beautiful museum, but a museum." The millionaire was silent for a moment, looking at the mansion behind him, and suddenly that place seemed even emptier than he remembered. Quieter, more distant from anything that had once been called home. "If you want," Chioma said with the voice of someone making a reasonable business proposal, "I can come play here sometimes." Ngozi's eyes widened. "Chioma, it would be good for the house." Chief Obina looked at the girl for a long moment, then looked at the mansion, then back at the girl. "Perhaps," he finally said in a voice that came out softer than he intended. "That's not such a bad idea." Chioma smiled, a smile so bright it seemed to change the temperature of the entire garden. But from above, from one of the second-floor windows, someone observed the scene with crossed arms and cold eyes. Adaobi Okoro, and her expression made it very clear. That girl was not welcome in that house. From the second-floor window, Adaobi Okoro watched the garden, with an expression that was anything but kind. Her eyes were fixed on Chief Obina, and the girl who was now running around the pond, chasing a yellow butterfly with open hands, laughing in a way that echoed through the entire garden and reached the closed window. Adaobi crossed her arms. Unbelievable. Beside her was her brother, Emeka Okoro, hands in his pockets, also looking down with an expression that mixed confusion with something he was still trying to name. "Who is that girl?" "The new cleaner's daughter." Adaobi's voice had the tone of someone describing something slightly repulsive. "She walked into Uncle's meeting yesterday, said he was her father." Emeka raised his eyebrows. "Seriously? And Uncle Obina didn't send her away immediately?" Adaobi turned to him with a look that said everything without needing words. "If he had, she wouldn't be in the garden now." Emeka was silent, watching the scene below. There was something different about Chief Obina that afternoon. His posture was different. His shoulders, usually tense in a straight line that resembled a man preparing for permanent battle, were relaxed. His expression, usually closed in on itself like a locked door, was open in a way Emeka couldn't remember seeing. "Are you seeing this?" "Seeing what?" "Uncle Obinna." Ada Obi looked at her brother. "What about him?" Emeka was silent for a moment, as if trying to articulate something surprising with the right words. "He's smiling." Ada Obi looked back at the garden, and for a moment, she felt something she didn't like at all to feel: uneasiness. Because in the last 5 years, no one had seen Chief Obinna Okoro truly smile. Not a meeting smile, not a protocol smile, not that movement of the lips that executives make when they need to appear pleasant. A real smile. And that was a very serious problem. "This has to stop," Ada Obi said. "Stop? She's just a child." "That's exactly the problem." Emeka looked at her. "That she's a child." Ada Obi turned fully to her brother with the carefully constructed patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone who should understand on their own, who in 2 days did what no one else could do in 5 years. The silence between them was heavy, because both knew what was at stake. Okoro Holdings was enormous. Businesses, properties, investment funds, stakes in medium-sized businesses scattered across the country. Chief Obinna had no children, no direct heirs. That had always meant something specific and important. Ada Obi had built her entire life on that premise. The plans she made, the decisions she took, the patience with which she endured her uncle's silence. Everything had been tolerated with the quiet certainty that in the end, time would play in her favor. But if Chief Obinna decided that this girl was part of his life, "What do you propose to do?" Emeka asked. Ada Obi walked to the table in the private sitting room, opened the drawer, and took out a thin folder. "First, we will act through the simplest route." Emeka waited. "If her mother loses her job," Ada Obi said, "she will have no reason to return to this house." That night, after 10 p.m., Ada Obi was still awake. Sitting at the table in the private sitting room, phone in hand, she dialed a number few knew. "Barrister Adebayo," she said when the call was answered, her voice low as someone who doesn't want to be overheard in the corridors. "I need a discreet consultation about estate planning. I want to understand what legally happens when a property owner decides to include a third party without kinship, by adoption, by recognition, or by any other available legal means." The voice on the other end murmured something. "I know," Ada Obi replied. "That's why I'm calling now before any decision is made. I want to know all the possibilities and all the legal impediments. I need to be prepared." When she hung up, she looked out the window at the dark garden of the mansion, and when it's all over, she thought silently, "That girl will go back exactly to where she belongs." Downstairs, in the illuminated kitchen, completely unaware, Ngozi and Chioma laughed together as the rice warmed on the stove, and Chioma tried to teach her mother the names of all the fish in the pond. The next morning at the Okoro mansion began like any other. The sun illuminated the perfectly manicured gardens. Employees greeted each other with that professional good morning of someone at work. The distant sound of the courtyard fountain filled the air with a calm that was, as always, deceptive. But inside the house's administrative office, Ada Obi Okoro was sitting opposite the house manager with a folder on the table and a very clear objective in mind. "Mr. Akinola," she said in a firm, calm tone, "we need to discuss an employee." The man looked up from the papers he was reviewing. "About whom, Miss Ada Obi?" Ada Obi placed the open folder on the table, facing him. Ngozi Okafor, the house manager, frowned. "Has something happened to her?" "Several things, actually." Ada Obi pointed to some documents with a well-manicured finger. Late arrivals, interruptions during work hours, improper use of the house's spaces during work hours. The house manager reviewed the papers carefully. "These reports are quite minor, Miss Ada Obi. None of them, in isolation, would justify a more serious action. Perhaps not in isolation." Ada Obi crossed her arms with a calm that was more frightening than any declared irritation. But when they accumulate, they form a pattern, and patterns of inappropriate conduct affect the environment of the entire team. The man hesitated. "Miss, Chief Obinna usually personally approves dismissals involving household staff. He is very careful with that type of decision. This isn't a major dismissal." Ada Obi leaned slightly forward. "It's a routine administrative decision. You have the authority for this. You've always had it." A pause. "I just need you to exercise that authority today." The house manager took a deep breath. "You want me to dismiss her?" Ada Obi replied without hesitation, like someone confirming a coffee order. Today, in the kitchen, Ngozi was finishing organizing some utensils while Chioma drew in a corner of the table with the color pencils Elder James had left there the day before. A gesture so small and so generous that Ngozi had stared at the pencils for a long moment before she could say thank you. "Mummy," Chioma said, holding up the paper. "Today I'm going to draw a portrait of Chief Obinna." Ngozi smiled wearily. "Another one. This one will be better." "Why?" "Because now I know how he smiles." Ngozi looked at her daughter with a mixture of tenderness and concern that had become her standard emotional state that week. There was something in Chioma's expression when she spoke of Chief Obinna, a quiet certainty, a silent belonging that both warmed and frightened her. At that moment, the house manager appeared at the kitchen door. "Mrs. Okafor." Ngozi looked up. "Yes, Mr. Akinola." The man seemed uncomfortable. It wasn't the discomfort of someone ashamed of doing something wrong. It was the kind of discomfort of someone who knows they are following questionable orders, but can't prove they are questionable. "I need to speak with you for a moment." Chioma looked up. "Can I listen?" Ngozi gently stroked her hair. "Wait here a second, darling." They walked to the corridor. The house manager sighed deeply before speaking, like someone preparing to say something they don't want to say. "Mrs. Okafor, I regret to inform you that today will be your last day working in this house." Ngozi's world stopped, not dramatically, but silently, like when the light goes out and the room suddenly goes dark. "What? We have received reports about your professional conduct but that's not true." Her voice came out firmer than she expected, firm in the way it appears when the injustice is great enough to overcome fear. "I know what I did and what I didn't do. I was never late. I never left my work halfway. I never. The decision has already been made, madam." Ngozi felt the ground disappear beneath her. "I need this job, my daughter. The bills, the rent. I don't have any other income right now. I need some time to. I'm sorry." In the corridor, the house manager's voice came muffled. Chioma appeared at the kitchen door. She had listened. Her eyes were full of a confusion that hurt more than any crying. "We're leaving?" Ngozi didn't know what to answer for a moment. The house manager lowered his gaze. "Yes." The girl looked at the unfinished drawing she still held in her hands. The portrait of Chief Obinna with the smile she had learned to draw, the sentence she had started to write underneath and hadn't finished. "So you don't get sad. But I promised I'd come back tomorrow." The silence in the corridor was devastating, and on the mansion's second floor, Adaobi Okoro watched the scene from the balustrade, with an expression of someone who had just seen the chessboard exactly how she wanted it. Her plan was working. The mansion corridor seemed longer than usual as Ngozi returned to the kitchen. Each step was heavier than the last. It wasn't the first time she had lost a job. She had been through other dismissals at the clothing store where she worked after Chioma was born, at the estate where she cleaned for 2 years before that contract ended. Life had taught her that doors close, that others open, that survival is a skill learned through practice and refined through pain. But this time it hurt differently, because she had seen something in her daughter during those days that she hadn't seen in a long time. True joy. The kind of joy that doesn't need to be fake to seem real, that appears on a child's face before they even know they are happy. When she entered the kitchen, Chioma was standing by the table, holding the drawing she had made. "Mummy," she asked in a very low voice, almost a whisper, in that tone she used when trying to be brave, but not quite succeeding. "Are we really leaving?" "Yes, my dear." The girl looked at the paper. It was Chief Obinna Okoro with a huge smile, and below the portrait, in crooked letters, the sentence she had started and not finished. "But I promised I'd come back tomorrow." Ngozi took a deep breath. Sometimes promises don't just depend on us. Chioma was silent for a few seconds. Then she looked up with a small but firm determination. "Then I need to say goodbye properly." Ngozi hesitated. She knew it would be best to leave without drawing more attention, to exit through the back door, take the bus on the main road, move on. It was what life had taught her to do, to move on without looking back for too long. But she also knew that her daughter would not easily forget that place, not as long as there was an unfulfilled promise. "All right," she finally said in a voice that came out more tired than she wanted. But just for a moment. Meanwhile, in the second-floor office, Chief Obinna Okoro had documents open in front of him, but couldn't read a single line. There had been a strange feeling since morning, something he couldn't quite name, but which prevented him from concentrating on anything. Then, there was a knock at the door. "Come in." The door opened slowly. Chioma entered. She walked a few steps into the office, her small shoes making a minimal sound on the marble, and stopped in the center of the room. Chief Obinna looked up from the document. His expression changed immediately. The girl wasn't smiling. "Hello, Chioma. What's wrong?" She lowered her gaze to the drawing in her hands. "I came to say goodbye." Chief Obinna frowned. "Say goodbye?" "Yes." The girl held up the paper. "This is for you. I didn't finish writing, but the important part is there. Chief Obina carefully took the drawing. It was him smiling, and underneath, in crooked child's letters, "So you don't get sad, never again." Chief Obina felt a knot in his chest that had no name in business books. "Why are you saying goodbye?" Kioma replied with that simplicity she had a gift for using at exactly the moments that mattered most. "Because we can't stay here anymore." Silence filled the office. "Who said that?" "A man spoke with my mummy, said we were dismissed." Chief Obina's face became serious, very serious, with the specific seriousness of someone who has just understood what happened and is precisely calculating what comes next. "Who made that decision?" Chioma shrugged her small shoulders. "I don't know, but I wanted to tell you something." "Before I go," Chief Obina watched her with total attention. "What?" The girl walked 2 steps towards him, stopped, and then said something that made the millionaire completely still. "Thank you for smiling." A pause. "Because when you smile, you don't seem so lonely anymore." The silence was deep and long. Chief Obina was speechless for a time he couldn't measure. Then he asked in a voice that came out lower than he intended, "Where is your mother now?" "Packing our things." The girl turned to the door. "Bye, Chief Obina. Thank you for the visit yesterday and for the swing." But before she reached the door, Chief Obina spoke. "Chioma." She turned. The millionaire was standing, at his full height. A height that used to intimidate, that used to define hierarchies before any word was spoken. He stood and said in a voice that was not that of a millionaire, but of a man, "No one is going anywhere." Chioma blinked. "What?" Chief Obina walked to the door with those steps that everyone in Okoro Tower knew, the steps of someone who has already made a decision and is merely executing it. "I think it's time to clarify some things." The sound of Chief Obina Okoro's footsteps echoed down the second-floor corridor with a precision that was almost musical. It wasn't a hurried step, but it had a firmness that every staff member in the mansion had learned to recognize in the 23 years the house had operated under that name. It was the same step he took when he was about to close an important deal, the same he used when he made a decision that no one dared to contest. The step of a man who knows exactly where he is going and why. In the first-floor living room, Ngozi finished packing the last few things into a small fabric bag. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from that specific tension of trying to maintain control of something that had been spiraling for too long. Kioma sat near the door with her gaze downcast. "Mummy," she asked in a very low voice, almost a whisper, "are we going to have to live at Auntie Bisi's house?" Ngozi forced a smile. "We'll see, okay? You don't need to worry about that now. I know Auntie Bisi's house is small. She won't like it much." Ngozi opened her mouth to reply, but a firm voice interrupted everything. "No one is going anywhere." Both turned immediately. Chief Obina Okoro stood at the entrance to the room with Chioma beside him, holding the unfinished drawing. Ngozi felt something she couldn't immediately name. It was relief and fear at the same time, like when you avoid a fall, but your heart races long afterward. The millionaire walked towards them. "Who gave the order to dismiss you?" Ngozi hesitated. "Mr. Akinola, the house manager." "And who gave him the order?" The silence was enough. Chief Obina looked up the staircase, and exactly at that moment, as if she had rehearsed the perfect timing of an appearance, Adaobi Okoro emerged on the second floor. She had heard everything. "I did," she said with calculated tranquility, resting her hands on the balustrade lightly, based on behavioral reports found in the employee's file. "It was a decision within my administrative duties." She began to descend the stairs with slow, deliberate steps, each step on the marble echoing through the room. Chief Obina did not raise his voice, but his gaze went to her like a straight line, without deviation, without concession. "Since when do you have duties over the staff of this house?" "Since someone needs to." She reached the first floor, her heels echoing on the marble, with a precision that had something of a declaration of intent. "Uncle Obina, this house has order. Employees work. They don't bring children to play in the garden as if it were a neighborhood park. They don't occupy spaces that are not theirs." Ngozi lowered her head. "She's right, Chief Okoro. I completely understand. We don't want to cause any trouble. But we like it here," Chioma said, with the devastating simplicity of her 6 years. The mere fact that the girl spoke at that moment made Adaobi miss a step for a fraction of a second. A small hesitation, but one that Elder James in the corridor noticed. Chief Obina looked at the girl, then at Ngozi. "You are not dismissed." Adaobi raised an eyebrow. "Uncle Obina, she's still working here. This is, and her daughter is welcome in this house." Adaobi was silent for a moment, internally reorganizing her strategy. Then she took a deep breath and tried another approach, one that had worked with lawyers, with administrators, with people who understood the weight of money and what was at stake when it was considerable. Uncle Obina, she said in a softer, closer voice, in a tone that aimed to sound like genuine concern. I understand you're feeling lonely. I truly understand, but I need to tell you something. With all the respect I have for you. She moved closer. You are one of the richest men in the country. People will always try to get close to you in creative ways, especially those who have nothing to lose and a lot to gain. The comment fell like a stone into the silence of the room. Ngozi lowered her head because those were exactly the words she had feared hearing since the first day. The words she heard in her own head when she wondered what others were thinking about her, about Chioma, about what all this proximity might look like from the outside. She's right, Ngozi whispered. We don't want any trouble. She gently took Chioma's hand. Come on, my dear. But before they could take a step towards the door, Chief Obina spoke. No one is going anywhere. This time there was something different in the firmness of his voice. It wasn't the firmness of a boss. It was the firmness of a man who had decided to stop escaping from something that had been close for too long to continue pretending it was far away. Ngozi stopped. Adaobi let out a short laugh, like someone losing patience but still trying to maintain appearances. You still don't understand what's happening here, Uncle Obina. I understand perfectly. Then you know what this woman is doing? I do. A pause. She is raising her daughter alone, with what she has, the best way she can, and doing it very well. The words occupied the space of the room in a way that none of Adaobi's strategies had managed. The millionaire walked slowly to the center of the room. Then he looked at each person present, at Ngozi, with downcast eyes but shoulders raised, at Chioma, with open, attentive eyes, at Elder James, who had appeared discreetly at the corridor entrance, without making a sound, at the two staff members who had stopped at the back, unsure whether they should leave, and finally, at Adaobi. I want everyone to hear what I am about to say. The silence was total. For the last 5 years, this house has become a museum. The corridors were cold, meals were alone, there was no noise, no mess, nothing that a house needs to be a real home. A pause. I let it be that way. I chose it that way because it was easier than feeling. Elder James in the corridor was completely motionless. And then a 6-year-old girl walked into my boardroom and called me daddy. Chief Obina looked at Chioma. Everyone expected me to send her away, to defend order, protocol, the professional environment, and the distance I had built with such care for so long. A small pause. But this girl did something no one had managed to do in a long time. He looked at her with an expression that had nothing calculated about it. She reminded me what it feels like to be alive. The silence in the room was the kind that doesn't need to be broken immediately. Adaobi had her arms crossed, her eyes cold, but there was something different in her expression now. Something that resembled the understanding that the ground had shifted completely and she hadn't noticed in time. And now you come to tell me that these two people don't belong here. They don't belong to our family, Adaobi said with the last card she had. Chief Obina took a few seconds, then said something no one expected to hear. Perhaps that's the problem, Adaobi frowned. What do you mean? That for years this family forgot something very important. He looked at Chioma, then at Ngozi. Family is not defined only by blood. He turned his eyes to Adaobi. Decisions also define. Love also defines. Adaobi let out an incredulous, short laugh, her last armor. Now you're going to adopt any child who shows up in your life? No. Chief Obina took a deep breath and uttered the words that would change everything. But I will give my surname to this one. The impact was immediate and absolute. What? Adaobi's voice came out sharp, losing for the first time the veneer of composure she had taken years to build. The staff exchanged silent glances. Ngozi was paralyzed, Chioma's hand still in hers, unable to speak. Sir, you can't be. Blood does not define who your family is, Chief Obina said, with a calm that was the opposite of what everyone in the room was feeling. Decisions do. He looked at Chioma. The girl didn't fully understand the words of law and inheritance and surname that the adults were using, but she understood enough. Does that mean I can stay? Chief Obina smiled. Yes. And for the first time in many years, the Okoro mansion was filled with something it had completely forgotten how to feel. Hope. The living room fell completely silent after Chief Obina's words. No one moved. No one breathed properly. I will give my surname to her. Adaobi was the first to regain her voice. But what came out was no longer strategy. It was pure rage, with a thin layer of dignity over it, the last reserve of a war she had lost. You are giving away our family name, the name our grandfather built, with decades of work, which our father defended with all he had, to a girl who appeared 2 days ago and whom you barely know. Chief Obina did not raise his voice. He never did. He pointed gently to Chioma. I am giving it to someone who gave me back something that was lost a long time ago. And what is that? There was genuine curiosity in Adaobi's question beneath the rage. She needed to understand, even if she didn't want to. Chief Obina paused. He looked at the girl who was watching him with wide, serious eyes, waiting with that patience children have when they know the moment is important, the ability to feel again. The silence was deep and full. Adaobi opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, and then, for the first and only time in that story, said nothing. She turned and left, her heels echoing on the marble. Each beat a little faster than the last, until the sound disappeared down the second-floor corridor. Emeka, who had appeared at the bottom of the stairs unnoticed, watched his brother for a long moment. Then he looked at Chioma, then at the corridor where his sister had disappeared, and slowly, without a word, he too withdrew. Chioma looked at Chief Obina. Your surname is very heavy. The millionaire smiled with a softness that Elder James, in 23 years in the house, had never seen on that face. No, he leaned slightly towards her, but the heart that carries it is. Weeks later, the Okoro mansion was no longer the silent place everyone remembered. For the first time in years, there was noise in the corridors. There was laughter in the kitchen. Quick footsteps in the garden. The creaking of the restored swing that Chioma used every afternoon before dinner. The new chains gleamed when the sun hit them. The treated wood still smelled of the varnish. Segun had carefully applied one Saturday morning, while Chioma sat on the grass watching and asking questions about each step of the process. The staff had grown accustomed to seeing the girl running through the spaces that were once always empty, drawing in the kitchen, sitting next to Chief Obina on the bench by the pond, leafing through the books on the office bookshelf with that seriousness of someone doing something important. The house no longer seemed like a museum, it finally seemed like a home. Elder James had noticed that his employer had started coming home from work earlier. He didn't comment to anyone, but he noticed and kept that observation with the same care with which he kept everything he understood about that house. He had also noticed that Chief Obina had asked the kitchen to always keep fresh fruits on the counter, because Chioma liked mangoes, and that he had ordered a collection of illustrated children's books, which were carefully stacked in the corner of the bookshelf next to the architecture and business books. The business books were still there, but now they had company. That particular afternoon, the sky over Ikoyi had that burnt orange color that only appears on cloudless days. The kind of sunset that makes the city seem more beautiful than usual, more habitable, more human. Chief Obina was sitting on the wooden bench by the pond. In those weeks, he had learned to recognize the sound of Chioma's footsteps arriving through the garden, her small shoes tapping on the stone path, then silencing on the lawn. Daddy. The word came out with the naturalness of someone who had said it 1,000 times, and there was no reason in the world for it to be otherwise. Chief Obina looked up. Yes. Chioma ran up and stopped beside the bench, holding up a paper folded in 4, with that specific care of someone carrying something they had spent all day thinking about creating. I made a new one. Let me see. She carefully unfolded it. It was a drawing of 3 people holding hands in front of a big house. The house had windows with flowers on the sills that the real mansion didn't have, but which Chioma had decided it should have. And above the drawing, in letters that were already getting straighter, firmer, more like what she intended, US. Chief Obina looked at the paper for a long time, then looked up. Ngozi was standing a few meters away, leaning against the veranda column, with the late afternoon light hitting her face from the side. There was something in that expression that Chief Obina had also learned to recognize. It wasn't simple joy. It was the joy of someone not used to being allowed to be happy, and slowly learning that permission had already been granted. Thank you, she said softly. Chief Obina shook his head. He looked at Chioma, who had already sat beside him, swinging her feet on the bench with the ease of someone who has belonged to a place for a long time. Thank you both. Why? Chioma asked with her head tilted to the side. Chief Obina looked at the sky. The light was changing from orange to purple, the kind of transition that lasts only a short time and therefore is worth more. At the edge of the pond, one of the gold tilapia fish jumped out of the water for a second and returned, leaving a circle of ripples slowly expanding. Chief Obina took a deep breath. Because you taught me that being a millionaire doesn't mean having everything. He put his arm around her shoulders. It means finding the people who make your life worthwhile. Chioma rested her head on his arm. The sun disappeared behind the trees, and the garden fell into that quiet twilight that precedes night. The kind of quietness that is not loneliness, but peace. 3 months later, at a registry office in Ikoyi, The registrar called out the name aloud for the final confirmation of the process. Chioma Okoro. The girl raised her hand with immense enthusiasm, the sleeve of her Sunday best shirt sliding down her elbow. Present. Some people in the room smiled. Elder James, sitting in a chair at the back, took a handkerchief from his suit pocket, with all the discretion his position had taught him. Chief Obina, beside Chioma, looked at the signed paper with the still crooked and still adorable handwriting of a child who was learning that her name had just gained another syllable and, along with it, a place in the world that no one else could take. And he smiled without reservation, without calculation, without the armor he had carried for 5 years, and which had been disarmed, piece by piece, by a 6-year-old girl, who had run through the wrong door on an important meeting day. Ngotsi, on Kyoma's other side, held her daughter's hand tightly, like someone who won't let go anymore. If this story touched your heart, write the name of a typical food from your city in the comments here. It could be jollof rice from Lagos, suya from Abuja, pounded yam from Ekiti, edikang ikong from Calabar, isi ewu from Igboland, akara from Ibadan, egusi soup from Port Harcourt, or anything else that represents where you live. Your comment helps these stories reach more people across Nigeria. And if you like stories that move you, that inspire, and that remind you of what truly matters, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any, because sometimes family doesn't come by blood, it comes by love.